Hi everyone. Today we're going to be talking about identifying the structure of macromolecules. I've created this short presentation as an additional study guide for my middle school biochemistry unit for living environment. I hope it helps you to identify the structure of molecules, macromolecules. Let's look at the structure of each of these macromolecules. By learning their structures, you'll be able to identify them. We have carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. And here's an example of each one of them. Here's a fatty acid. This one is a carbohydrate. This one is a protein. And this one is a nucleic acid. But the first one we're going to talk about is carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates can be broken down further into subgroups. The first group is called monosaccharides. Mono meaning one. The way you identify a carbohydrate is by its structure. So here you see that monosaccharide carbohydrates have two forms of structure, a long chain and a ring. It can be in either form. The other identifying feature of a carbohydrate is that it contains these elements: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So let's take a look at the ring structure or the long chain structure, and let's identify some of the elements. So in this long chain structure, monosaccharide, which happens to be glucose, we can find the hydrogen, the oxygen, and the carbon elements. And the same with the ring structure. We have hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon in different forms, varying amounts. There is one rule, though, that the hydrogen to oxygen ratio must be 2:1. So let's do a little exercise and count the elements. So let's look at this long chain structure and let's count how many carbon molecules we have. 1 and 2. So I've put 2 here. 2 carbon. How many hydrogens do we have? Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we can write in 12. Let's take a look at the oxygen and see how many oxygens we have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So let's write 6. So the formula for this particular long chain structure carbohydrate would be C2H12O6. And even though you notice that there are 2 carbon atoms, you will notice that the hydrogen to oxygen ratio is 2:1. There are 12 hydrogen and 6 oxygen. Let's move on to another subgroup of carbohydrates, which is disaccharides and polysaccharides. So another way we often see the structure of carbohydrates, again we have the ring. Now this time we have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen again, and the 2:1 hydrogen-oxygen ratio. But take a look at this. We have here a disaccharide. Di meaning 2. This happens to be sucrose. And look at this. This is a polysaccharide. Poly meaning many. This particular macromolecule is amylose starch. It's made up of glucose molecules. This disaccharide, sucrose, is made up of one molecule of glucose bonded to a molecule of fructose. So two monosaccharides bonded together make a disaccharide. And many monosaccharides bonded together make a polysaccharide. The next one we're going to talk about is lipids. The way we identify lipids is not ring or long chain structures, but this time we're going to see chains. The elements are C, H, and O. And they have a characteristic E shape to them, which we'll discuss in a minute. Let's take a look at this image of a fatty acid macromolecule. What's the first thing you notice? We're talking about chains. Look at the chain of carbon atoms here. There's another chain of carbon here and another chain here. Now this one is a little bit different and we'll talk about it in a second. But notice the elements are the same. There's hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen. And it has a characteristic E shape. There's your carbon chain, and this is your carboxyl group. The hydrocarbon chain and the carboxyl group are bonded to a glycerol. This is a glycerol. So lipids are made up of long hydrocarbon chains ending in a carboxyl group that bonds to a glycerol to form a fat. Let's check out the characteristic E shape of a lipid. Saturated fats have all single bonds. These two tails, these two chains, are saturated fats, and we can tell because they have all single bonds. However, unsaturated fats, which is what we see in this particular tail or chain, have double and sometimes triple bonds between the carbon atoms. And this is an unsaturated fat. The next one we're going to talk about is proteins. Now, proteins are made up of amino acids. An amino acid is a building block of protein. It's the monomer, or single unit, that makes up proteins. One way that we identify a protein molecule is by its characteristic carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen elements. And it is globular in shape. We'll talk about that in a moment. Here is an image of a protein molecule. This is an amino acid. Notice that the amino acid is made up of an amino group, H2N. It's also made up of a carboxyl group, which is your COOH. OH. And then it has an R or variant group, which decides the type of amino acid that it will be. So in this image, you can see the primary structure of proteins starts by amino acids joining together. This creates the primary structure. And depending on the R or variant group, determines the type of amino acid it is. In this chain, we see there are many different types of amino acids joining together. These are called amino acid subunits. This structure gets pleated and folded until it forms the characteristic globular shape. The last one we're going to discuss is nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are identified because they are DNA and RNA. Another way to identify them is to see that they have the elements C, H, O, N, and P. Remember, a nucleotide is a monomer of nucleic acid. Let's take a look at the structure. Nucleic acids have three characteristic parts to them. One is the phosphate group, which is right here. You can always identify it by the oxygen right here. The next one is the sugar, which is right here. And then we have the nitrogenous base. In this case, it's adenine. There are 4 of them, which we'll discuss at a later time. Another way to identify the structure of a nucleic acid macromolecule is by its characteristic double helix appearance. Take a look at this image of a nucleic acid. Notice the double helix shape. The nitrogenous bases are adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. It's made up of a phosphate group and a 5-carbon sugar. Those are the twisted ladder shapes. This image here is a simplified version, and it makes it very easy to understand that nucleic acids are made up of a phosphate group, a sugar, and a base, and that the base changes based on which nitrogenous base this nucleic acid would be representing. Well, that's all I have for tonight, and I hope this study guide helps you to further understand how to identify the structure of macromolecules.